very, very well-to-do family and a very avant-garde philosophical youth who met Srila Prabhupada and then spent 55 years living as a monk, celibate, and spreading Krishna consciousness. So, big round of applause for Hiran. The great soul by Sheshwar Maharaj, who's just enthusiasm, purity, and devotion to God. And so we're so grateful that was 10 seconds or less because you requested that Maharaj did, so I have to speak more about it. So what we thought we'd do, it's a kirtan night, so it's mainly going to be kirtan tonight. But what we thought we'd do is just we don't feel good about not having our elders speak when they come. For the next 45 minutes or so, they'll pass the mic back and forth and speak whatever they speak. We're also joined by Ashram Manj, a big round of applause. Just by way of introduction, in case you don't know him, Ashram Manj was a professor of English literature, is that correct?
Right.
Professor of writing for decades, and is incredibly well-read, and is a brilliant writer. A lot of people don't know. He's just incredibly well-educated, and had a dream where Srila Prabhupada asked him to take sannyas. He was married with a family and a very, very successful career in academia, and he had a dream that Srila Prabhupada told him to take sannyas. He's Prabhupada's disciple, and he took it seriously. He took sannyas. And he's a big leader on the West Coast now, so let's give him a big round of applause.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare.
As Shukram Prabhu mentioned when my father came to get me back, I thought I'll elaborate a little on the incident. I was in Calcutta with people, and my parents came to visit, and I wasn't sure how to respond, and she probably said, no, you have to spend time with them. So I did spend some time with them and took them to some tourist places and introduced them to some of my friends. And then they came to meet Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada spoke very expertly in such a way as to whittle away at my father's prejudices. He began by saying that he had a electrical shop, and in his shop, he would have some products made in India and some products made in England. The exact same product. And the product made in England cost 3 times more. So one of his Motilal Nehru, and he would always take the product made in England. And Srila Prabhupada, he was a made in England man. So that was sort of working on my father's prejudice, say, in favor of the West. Then Srila Prabhupada said that Motilal Nehru told him that he had a son named Jawaharlal who was useless. And so he was thinking of giving him freedom.
Do you understand what I'm talking about? Nehru was the first prime minister of India.
Jawaharlal.
I'm sorry?
Jawaharlal.
Yeah, and so he was talking to his father. So Nehru was the first prime minister of India, and Motilal Nehru was his father. So he's talking, so Prabhupada was friends with the father of the first prime minister of India, and his father said, "My son is useless." His son became prime minister of India before India won independence. So it's like a wild piece of history, just in case you don't know. Like an unbelievable piece of history.
So you can say in that regard, Srila Prabhupada was not on my father's prejudice in that big man in the material world must be something special. So at some point, my parents said that they, my father said he wanted to establish a trust for me with $1 million, which was worth more then than it is now. And he wanted me to come to America and sign the papers. And Srila Prabhupada said, yes, you can sign the papers, and he will sign. So then, but still my father and mother wanted me to come to America. So Srila Prabhupada said, well, I'll be coming in the summer, and I'll bring him with me. So I said, let's see how intelligent Srila Prabhupada is, because in the summer when it's hot in India and it's pleasant in the West, he goes to the West. And in the winter when it's too cold in the West and pleasant in India, he's in India. So by this point, my father was getting quite enlightened by Srila Prabhupada. And he said, actually, your master is very intelligent. And Srila Prabhupada said, your son is intelligent because he has understood my strategy. And my father said, no, actually, you are very intelligent. And Srila Prabhupada said, well, I guess I must be, otherwise, how could I attract so many intelligent young men as your son? So in those days, people in the West had the idea that if you didn't eat meat, you wouldn't get enough protein. And so my mother was concerned about that. And Srila Prabhupada kept sweets on his desk, and especially in Calcutta, so he had some dash on the and so he put sandesh in my father's hand and my mother's hand. And he said, these are made of cheese. and they're very high in protein. And when he said, "Do you rush?" He must eat 2 dozen Rasgulla and I'm working on it. So, yeah, my parents were quite charmed by Sri Prabhupada. And yeah, that was another thing. I was quite thin at the time, so yeah, my parents were a little concerned about that also. But anyway, they were charmed by Sri Prabhupada, and as we were leaving Prabhupada's room, my father said, "I'll say 2 things about your master. One, he's a brilliant organizer, and 2, he really knows how to deal with people." And my father's value system, those are 2 of the highest compliments that he could pay to anyone. So then, from Calcutta, I went to Madras, and I was the first devotee, a few of us, 4 of us went, were the first devotees to go to Madras. And I was, staying at different people's homes, eating lots of good sambars and idlis and dosa, and I put on weight. So we arranged a program for Srila Prabhupada to came to Madras, and he saw that I gained weight. And he said, "You should take a picture of yourself and send it to your mother." And he hadn't forgotten her concern and so kind of compassionate. And yeah, maybe let's tell one more incident since we're on the topic of Madras. So in Madras, I was preaching, and I heard Srila Prabhupada preach. But I heard there was an undercurrent of protest about the way I was preaching. And even friends said, don't criticize others, just say what you want in a positive way about your philosophy and your activities, but don't criticize others. So I kept hearing it from some inside, or maybe Christians trying to tell me something. So one evening I had an appointment with an industrialist who had a compound, and in the compound was his factory and his office and so I went to my son and I said, if we just, put his books on the table, so I showed him the books, I showed him pictures of our activities, and I asked him to become a life member. And he said, you said so many things, but you haven't said anything about Shankaracharya. What about Shankaracharya? So yes, he's also one of the famous acharyas of India. What about him? The program. And finally, it all came out. He was an incarnation of Shiva, and he taught this Maya philosophy to lead people. And we didn't have the Chaitanya Charitamrita then, but we had the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, and so I read a little about Shankaracharya from the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. And I really didn't want to get into any controversy or criticize but I couldn't help it. So I thought, anyway, so I thought that's the end of it. Put the books back in my briefcase, put the pictures back in my briefcase. And then he said, I want to show you my temple room in my home. And I looked at him, because I thought he's probably going to have Shiva Linga and offer obeisances and feel offended. So I looked at him, do I really have to? And he said, yes, you really have. So I went to his, and he had quite a nice temple room, as home temples go, white marble. And on the platform were Radha Krishna deities. And I was so happy to see them because almost all the Vishnu temples in Madras were Narayan, four-headed Narayan, and then there was this one Sarthi ocean, which is just Krishna. So I looked at him like, what is going on? And he said, actually, I and my family for many generations have been devotees of Radha and Krishna. And I was just testing. And we did not compromise. So I'm very pleased with you. And I will be happy to help you last night. So we went back out and he signed the check for the full amount. So I thought, well, maybe what I'm doing isn't wrong, but I still wasn't completely sure. But then when I got back to where I was staying, there was a letter from Srila Prabhupada. And the words like just jumped off of the page. And Srila Prabhupada wrote that I am the only one in India who's openly criticizing not only impersonalism and demigod worship, but anything that falls short of complete surrender to Krishna. My Guru Maharaj never compromised in his preaching, and I never compromised in my preaching. And similarly, none of my disciples should compromise in their preaching. And we must declare boldly to the world that Krishna is the supreme Godhead, and they should not foolishly dream of peace unless they're prepared to surrender to Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. So I felt I got my answer from Srila Prabhupada, and it was an important instruction. Another important instruction, which came back in Calcutta, when we had the first Calcutta Padma. The first big Padma we had was in Bombay. It was very successful, and I could go back to that, but for now. And after that, Srila Prabhupada sent to my Padma to Calcutta to put on a program there. And so I noticed that Srila Prabhupada more or less preached the same way. And I just had this thought that, you could preach that Krishna consciousness is whatever, the perfect social system, the perfect philosophy, the perfect economic program. And Srila Prabhupada replied that, unless someone actually experiences Krishna consciousness, they won't be able to appreciate it again. So then, later in this room, and this is where I wanted to come to, I said to Srila Prabhupada, now you're here with us, and everything is going nicely. But what if in the future, when you're not here, this kind of falls from the standard? And Srila Prabhupada replied, you are also one of the important members of the society, which I didn't think I was at that time. But anyway, you are also one of the important members of the society. So you work for the correction, but don't leave. And I've also taken that as a very important instruction. And I think it applies to all of us, really, not just to me. So, yeah. Hare Krishna.
Oops. Sorry. It's all right. Thank you very much, Mara. Just sitting next to you, I feel privileged. Thank you. I mean, being on the same planet as you at the same time. And nice to be with all of you. So important. We live in cities and towns, and the idea is people like to live close to one another. Because we get a lot from each other normally. Sometimes there's a sense of isolation. I know in the suburbs, people don't together, they go in their own little house, and they get in their own little car, they sit in their own little cubicle somewhere. And it's possible to be amidst people and still feel isolated. And it's very important for the human spirit to come together and share realizations and also console one another, because the human experience is fraught with many emotional traumas and trials of many kinds. And so it's important to support one another. So to have this kind of community is vital, because oftentimes people do come together, but they're not really sure how to console one another. They give platitudes that, okay, it's going to be all right. And then one might think, well, you're not going to be all right. So how is your saying I'm very helpful? The ideal situation is to have a community where the idea is to be oriented towards one's real self. That we're not our physical bodies or mental bodies, which bears repeating because it does seem like we are, doesn't it? In fact, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, one of the great saints of all time, Devahuti, had mentioned to her spiritual master, who's also her son, that it really does feel like I am my body and life. And it seems like I've been like this eternally and probably will be forever. And he gave such an encouraging answer to her. He said, it is possible to overcome that. He said, it takes time. In fact, he said it takes a long time. And one should go on serving and hearing. And of course, when we're in association with others that are doing devotional service and also hearing about Krishna, and it becomes an encouraging. So a few experiences that I've had recently. My wife and I, this is my wife Mira, she joined Christian consciousness when she was in her teens, like 16, 17, and came from New York City and California, because that's what we did back then, 1970, circa 1972, and ended up meeting the devotees in Northern California and accepting an invitation to go for a short visit over the weekend to the Los Angeles community, otherwise known as New Dwarka. How many of you have been there? Some Watseka Avenue, not too far from Venice Beach, and then she didn't leave and go with her friends. Matt and I became a devotee in 1973. Have had an intense desire to answer questions about life, especially when I had to die, and like what I was doing was important if I did have to die, and minus a lot of details. I came in contact with Srila Prabhupada's teachings through his books. And although I had read many books, his were very clear and helpful to me and answered my questions so completely that I wanted to further my association with the author. And at that time, I was aware of the Hare Krishna movement because I grew up in the Bay Area around San Francisco from the East Bay. But I used to go into Berkeley a lot because my parents worked there. And I used to see the devotees chanting Hare Krishna on the UC Berkeley campus, Sproul Plaza. And then I was able to join the temple in San Francisco. So I lived also in an ashram for 13 years. And then at age 29, I decided to get married, and I was introduced to Miracle Devidasi, who lived in Los Angeles and was engaged in service. And then when we got married, we started our own ashram, home ashram, called like Grihastha ashram. Means we don't live in the temple, but we live outside, but keep the same principles. And it was a revelation to me that you had to pay for stuff. Because I never did. I grew up with my family and depended on their good graces. And then when I left, I was 16 and I joined the ashram and lived for another 13 years, simply, but I didn't have any money, nor did I have a bank account or any evidence that I existed. Which took a lot of work because I realized that there was a lot you had to do to establish yourself in the world. A little thing called credit. And I won't go into all the details of how I was able to establish credit, but we did. And Miracula and I found that living on the outside of the temple ground and conducting ourselves, doing the same kinds of things that we had learned in the temple was helpful. One of the ways it was helpful is explained in a verse from the Sri Upanishad that says, Vidyam cha yas tad vedo bhayam saha, avidyayam ritum tirva, vidyayam ritum ashnite. I'm smiling because there's devotees here who know me and they quote it a lot. And it says, only one who can understand nescience and transcendental knowledge side by side can transcend the influence of repeated birth and death and enjoy the full blessings of immortality. And we've found in our lives of living a life in which we are integrated with the world, so to speak. We own a house, and we've had businesses. We're both retired now, and we've interacted with our families in various ways. I didn't grow up in a particularly religious family, but my family celebrated Christmas pretty vigorously. And after I had reestablished a close relationship with my family, then Christmas things had to go on, and Mirkula took care of all that. I had no idea what kind of gifts we were giving people, but she figured it all out and made it seem as if I was a lot more engaged than it was. But there's so many interactions that we have with our families and with the world, and at the same time maintaining our practice that Srila Prabhupada had taught us, that we learned from living in the ashram, was trying to look for the right word. It was edifying. We felt quite certain. It reminds me of a kind of glue that my father used to get that always confounded me when I was a kid. It was called epoxy. And you had it by 2 tubes. And of course, you may not know this because now there's super glue. But you had, one wasn't helpful without the other. You had to combine the two. And you had to do it. I was just thinking, why don't they just do it for us? And I'd say, no, you have to do it now, just before you apply it. The combination of the two is what did it. And we've found what has been written in Bhagavad Gita and other of the literatures we've taken for guidance, and what the great saints have said. It doesn't matter where you live and under what circumstances, as long as you keep the transcendental vibration going. There's a song by Bhaktivinoda Thakur where he says, which means it doesn't matter if you live in a house in the forest, as long as you keep the essence, the sound vibration. And that brings me to my last point, which is just recently, one of the devotees in our community, which is in Silicon Valley, and had contracted cancer, and then there was a downward spiral, and she ended up in hospice. And so we went, lots of us, there was nice space in the room at Stanford Hospital. And when we went there, being around someone who's leaving the world can be awkward. For those who haven't cultivated spiritual life. In fact, Krishna says it in the Bhagavad Gita, that study the science of Krishna consciousness aren't bewildered, not only when they leave, when somebody else leaves, what to speak of the person, him or herself leaves, they're not bewildered by it. And what I found was in that environment, there were various family members coming, some of them were oriented towards Krishna consciousness. And so what we did was we chanted. In fact, I brought my drum. And I was bringing it into the hospital. It's kind of a quiet zone, isn't it, usually? And I hear some, person clad like I was, and lugging in a big drum. We got in the room, and she was subdued, and then when I started playing the drum, she opened her eyes and looked over to see what was going on. And it reminded me when we were in India at a big festival at a holy place called Radhakund. And we had a big group, but they were all divided in getting there. And so we started a kirtan, it's the crowd. But the first group, we only had some little kartals. And the kirtan had some impact. but it didn't attract the crowd and had a deep effect until the drum showed up. So when we got in the room, they started playing the drum, and then the devotees started chanting the Maha Mantra. We had a sense that that was the right thing to do.